Chapter 23, World War I, Section 4, Establishing Peace. There are many costs of this war. When the war ended in November of 1918, it was quite destructive. The casualties included 5 million Allied soldiers dead. That included 116,000 Americans. The Central Powers lost 3.5 million soldiers. Russia and Germany had the highest death totals in the war. Financially, it destroyed much of Western Europe. $30 billion in property was destroyed from France, Germany, and Russia. The Allies spent $145 billion on the war, and the Central Powers spent $63 billion on the war. So really combined, it's over $200 billion was spent on World War I. For that time, that was outrageous numbers. European nations were deeply in debt. The destruction not only hit like buildings and stuff, but farmland was destroyed as well. So you couldn't raise crops, which means that severe food shortages occurred throughout much of Europe at this time. I mean, the world was in shock in 1918 when that war ended, and the number of lives that were lost and land that was destroyed. But just to add insult to injury, a worldwide epidemic of influenza, which is the flu, broke out, and it was spread by American soldiers to civilians, and then to Europe, and then beyond. So it started with American soldiers. They went home, spread it to people there, which then in turn was spread to Europe and then other areas around the world. It killed about 30 million people worldwide. That's more than the war itself. 800,000 were Americans. The epidemic changed life everywhere in the United States. For example, in Chicago, the flu more than doubled the normal death rate in the fall of 1918. Many of those who died were young and strong. So state and local governments took measures to prevent the spread of the disease. Quarantines were implemented in some states, and many cities banned public gatherings such as school. Again, all in the attempt to stop the spread of the flu. Before World War I, or before the United States even entered World War I, President Wilson had begun making plans for a peace agreement. He wanted to prevent another world war from ever happening. He outlined his vision in something called the 14 Points for Peace, and it includes some of the following things that we're going to see on the screen. This does not include all of them, but it includes some. The end of secret alliances, which we know was one of the main causes. Encourage free shipping. Remove barriers to trade. Reduce armies and navies. Resolve colonial claims. Support the right of people to choose their own government, settle border disputes, and one of the things he thought was like the crown jewel of this 14 points was an establishment of a League of Nations, which would be an organization or assembly of nations from around the world to help try to keep peace around the world. European leaders disagreed with Wilson's vision. Wilson figured that, Germany and the Central Powers have pretty much suffered enough, and why make it worse for Germany? He wanted to reduce the punishment on Germany and the Central Powers. European leaders didn't agree with that. They wanted to punish Germany harshly for its role in the war, and they wanted to prevent Germany from ever becoming a world power again. American and European leaders met at the Paris Peace Conference, which was held at a palace called Versailles. There were no representatives from Russia because they pulled out already, and the Central Powers are not represented as well. So this is mainly the Allies who are meeting to discuss the peace treaty. Allied leaders demanded that Germany accept blame for the war, and they had to make reparations or payments for damages to the Allies. and they had to give up large parts of their territory. Now, the reparations accumulated to about $33 billion. That would be what Germany would have to pay as their punishment for being in the war. Wilson reluctantly agreed to this peace agreement, which officially became known as the Treaty of Versailles. Like I said, German reparations went to $33 billion. The League of Nations was established. New countries were formed. Estonia, Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia became independent nations. Poland was restored as a nation. The Central Powers turned over all their colonies to the League of Nations, and the Central Powers nations broke up. For example, Austria-Hungary, that large empire, was broken apart. And like Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia became independent nations because of that. Now, in the United States, the Constitution states that any treaty has to be ratified by at least 2/3 of the Senate. Wilson presented the treaty to the Senate. He also went around the country trying to convince people to accept the Treaty of Versailles. Of course, during his campaigning for the treaty, he had a severe stroke and was incapacitated for the rest of his presidency. Many people think his wife was actually the one that was running the country, but he was incapacitated. Anyway, Senator Henry Cabot Lodge wanted the winners to set the terms of the peace and demanded changes. And he thought it was the United States who should be making these changes. The Republicans were worried that being a part of the League of Nations would drag them into more wars, or make them use their military more. On November 19th, 1919, the Senate voted to not accept the Treaty of Versailles. So the United States will not be signing off on that treaty. Instead, the United States signed separate peace treaties with Germany, the newly separated Austria, and the newly separated Hungary. That is the end of section 4.